Good morning, everybody, and welcome. Welcome to 2022. Thanks so much for registering to join us. And good afternoon, New Zealand, and good morning, Australia, and anyone else that's joining us. Thanks for making some time to be with us. So today we wanted to focus on the data that matters, primarily focusing on the Eloqua Form Design editor to help us through that process. Let's just jump into some housekeeping, and we'll get started. So as you know, we use Zoom to record our webinars. Replays will be available via our blog and you'll be emailed with details after the event. If you do have any questions throughout the process, please use the Zoom Q&A function to do that. If you do have a specific question though, you may feel free to use the chat function as well. And Jason is on the line today assisting me with that process. Jason is one of our account directors, and my name is Derek Bell, the Director for Customer Success and Marketing here at Marketing Cube. Let's jump in and have a look at the agenda and see what we're up to. So welcome and introduction, then looking at identifying the data that matters and tips on how to, in fact, prioritize that data. We'll look at the form in two parts. First of all, some fundamentals, and then also perhaps some advanced tips to help you get a little bit more out of the form as well. We also promised to mention lead scoring because it's difficult to, it's difficult to build out a robust lead score model if you in fact lack the data to do that. So we just wanted to share some advice that, through observations of building lead score models over the years with different clients, and we'll cover those as well for you. And for some of you, the release 22A, which is rolling out this month, will have already happened and is underway. Some of you will receive that update a little bit later in the month. So we'll work out exactly who's who and show you some of the different functions that have been released. So first of all, we just wanted to share a little bit of information with you and also provide a link. So this is one of those QR code locations. So last year we talked a few times or got some feedback through polls and through other discussions with clients around the most suitable location to engage online. And LinkedIn won. Facebook kind of got a little bit of a mention, but LinkedIn was certainly the preferred channel. So to start that process, if you haven't already and you'd like to, please feel free to follow us on LinkedIn. So you can use your QR code on your smartphone to scan that code on screen right now. We'll show you that code again before the day's out, just in case you miss it. But go ahead and follow the business, and you'll start to see the user group events being listed there as well, and providing an avenue within each of those events for discussion to take place. So whether we end up creating a specific group within LinkedIn, that's yet to be determined, but let's have a go and start with the follow process. The other part that we like to show you is some attribution. So looking at the user group today, which was the most effective channel for us in relation to registrations. So we list the user group on our website under upcoming events. There's usually links in our blog as well in different locations, and also on LinkedIn as well. So Eloqua wins though, Eloqua by way of email. That is reaching out to people who have subscribed, like yourself, to the user group and potentially some newbies along the way as well. So you can see that email certainly is the biggest channel. We'd like to try and grow the pie a little bit there in relation to some of those social channels, primarily LinkedIn, hence the request for you to follow us and see what you think if that's a channel that you'd like to play in. Just some other bits and pieces, I suppose, the data that we're able to capture at the point of registration. As you know, we offer you an opportunity to receive an SMS reminder. And you can see there almost half, just shy of half of people when they register request an SMS reminder. So that would have gone through at around 10 a.m. this morning for those people that requested it. And it's just simply a reminder. I've had numerous clients tell me over the years that, thank goodness for that SMS. I was stuck somewhere and the SMS popped in. And so they remembered to get back to their desk in time for the user group. A great tool for events, whether it's for webinars or even in-person events, SMS is a great channel. And who's on the webinar today? So a little bit of the human side of the equation. So based on information that you provide at the point of registration and what we know about you and job titles and those sorts of things, we sort of break it down like so. So these are all marketing roles, so marketing managers, marketing directors, etc. The CEO is actually a mix of a couple of CMOs and CEOs. So, and then of course the individual contributors as well. Just a bit of a breakdown for you, more of an FYI than anything else. But of course, all this information is something that you can capture when you build your registration forms as well. And so that can help you just profile the people that we're talking to. So again, if you missed that QR code for LinkedIn, there it is again. But let's jump in. So identifying the data that matters and some tips on helping you to prioritize it. You know, first-party data is the key, and we know that first-party data is becoming more and more critical to what we do as marketers, as other forms of data become difficult, and in some cases a little bit bound up by lawyers and all sorts of different things and legislation from different governments around the world and different geographies. If you only deal in one geography, that's probably that's a great thing. If you deal in work in multiple jurisdictions or different countries, then it becomes a little bit more complex. Think of the GDPR, for example, across Europe. So why is the data important? Well, this first-party data over the last 12 months or longer even, we've known is going to become more and more critical. But what does it actually mean for us as marketers, and how is it really going to help us? The quality of the data, and generally it's interesting when you do some reading, most of the quality or the best quality data organizations have is generally their first-party data. So the quality of the first-party data for most organizations is generally the best quality data that they have. So you can pick up data from other locations, etc., but your data typically is the data that you probably have the most confidence in. While some people still need to increase in their levels of confidence around that first-party data, that's important. It also depends on your intended audience. So how effectively are you engaging with that audience? And if you're not confident, well, we need to work on that. Okay, now once you determine what the data is that really matters to you as a business, the next step is we need to work out how to collect it effectively. And by that, that's where your forms come into play. So your Eloqua Forms will play a critical role in that process. So let's have a look at some examples as well. So, but first of all, what's the most important data for you? Well, it's going to differ. There'll be clients on the line today from higher education. There'll be clients from wealth management, financial services, adult learning and education. There'll be a whole range of different people on the call today. So really what is most important to one organization is different to another. One filter that you can apply as to trying to identify the important data is if I pass a lead, if I collect a lead through different campaigns, I pass that lead over to the sales team, or maybe it's a service team who are making outbound phone calls or contacting those people, what's the baseline information that they need in order to make that phone call or to initiate that particular contact? That might be the most important data to you. Now, that's looking, of course, at prospects. Then when we talk about customers, that is people who are buying things and transacting with you today, what's the most important data you need for them? You can see quite quickly that there's sort of two different scenarios that are building there in relation to the importance of those different types of data and which data really does matter. So if we look at some examples, just to get right down to the nitty-gritty. So if we look at higher education as an example, so there are a whole different range of pieces of information that we've seen various higher education clients needing. And these are just some of the examples that we've seen that are usually quite important for them to help them have much richer conversations with people. So date of birth, high school graduation date, career interests, previous study, cultural background, highest level of current education. It differs, of course, as we move into different industries. And so let's take wealth management as an example. Am I an advisor, or am I an investor who is self-directed, or an investor who's advised? Am I in fact a stockbroker? And maybe the country I'm in, sort of a geographical mix in that information might also be critical in relation to what I'm doing, because laws differ in different countries. And so that big block of text that you need at the bottom of your emails, for instance, it needs to be in context to where that person is. Legal services. So do you have in-house counsel? Which industry are you in? Company headquarters and location. All those sorts of things can often be important from a legal point of view. Now, what if I'm a technology provider, whether I sell software or hardware, etc.? Probably some of the critical things I'm going to want to understand is what's the current technology that you use? How many users do you have? Which industry are you in? And then maybe a little bit softer type of questions around, what are the current limitations that you face or the pain points, for instance? So most of these are more profile oriented, except when you get to things like current limitations. That's a little bit more of a softer question, but this will differ for everybody. So these are just some examples. And so once we identify that these fields or these particular data points are in fact important, what are we doing in order to actually capture that information? And is that discussion and that thinking and that thought process going from the workout or the room where we sit in and brainstorm all of these things? Are we then taking that information and actually implementing it in our forms when we run events and when we offer access to thought leadership or open day registrations, those sorts of things? Or are we just simply asking the same questions that we've always asked? That's not going to work. Okay, we can have the strategy, that's wonderful, but we need to implement the strategy. That typically means that forms need to be rethought, and Eloqua gives you a range of tools to obviously help you enhance that. And progressive profiling has to be one of the big ones. You'll notice when you register for the user group, we pretty much are at a point where I'm not sure what else we can ask you besides getting to deeply personal questions, because you attend regularly, etc. We have the baseline information about you. We did refresh the forms, I think, midway through last year. So for some of you, depending on who you are and how long you've been attending and what we know about you, you won't even see first name, last name, and company name, for example. Those things will be hidden away in the form. So we've tried to reduce that process, but generally speaking, all you really need to do is say yes or no to an SMS reminder, select the US or the Australian user group that you want to attend, and in some cases submit a question. So there's not a great deal there for you to do. So hopefully that's a fairly simple process for you to go through. Let's jump in and have a look at the fundamentals and the basics. So if you're new to Eloqua, this will be a great starting point. So the forms have multiple applications, and you'll do all sorts of different things with forms, but it might surprise you to know that there are actually some really cool ways that forms can be used that you may not have thought of. But they are essentially the primary method you've got of taking information or obtaining information from people to load both into Eloqua and then potentially also pass on to the CRM. Now, the CRM, for those who are connected to a CRM, the CRM plays a pretty critical role in this process as well, because you've got the service team and the sales team and other CRM users who are obviously able to add information to the system and to which Eloqua is then able to see. So if we think about customers separate to prospects, so customers, we need to start to understand, well, which products or services does the customer actually have? And how easier for me to go into Eloqua and actually create a list or a segment of customers. You'd be surprised how many organizations struggle with that very basic construct. How do I identify a customer? Okay, so forms can help us bring information into the system. From a lead point of view, then when we start to talk about customers, that typically requires additional information from the CRM or potentially even from an ERP or billing system that may feed into the CRM and provide updates, etc. People can provide all sorts of information. There's really no limit to what you can ask in a form. Of course, you can ask what you want, but the likelihood of some people responding could be limited depending on the nature of the question. So we need to think that through, but we also need to think very carefully about the data that matters to us as a business. What's really going to help us have a richer conversation with people? So I found this quote from Lisa, who is an American author, Lisa Lutz, I think it's pronounced. So she says, our ability to adapt is amazing. Our ability to change isn't quite as spectacular. My point being there that if we keep doing the same thing we've always done, if we keep using the same forms and don't change our forms, we're not really going to get anywhere. We're not going to enhance the profile. We're not going to make any really cool decisions if we're just simply doing the same thing again and again. So I'll leave that with you with a little bit of thinking music. So we're new to Eloqua and we're trying to work out where am I going to use forms? Well, forms can actually be used in a range of places. Most common place is probably on an Eloqua landing page. Your CMS is also right up there with probably the number 2 location. So keeping in mind that you can repost data from your website or your CMS directly into Eloqua. And there are loads of benefits and reasons to do that. One is data quality. Attribution can be consolidated and stored within Eloqua, and if necessary, passed on to the CRM as well. Blind forms is another way. So a blind form is literally a form that the person never sees. So what might happen is you might have an email, and in the email, you ask them a yes or no question, and you have 2 buttons, a yes button and a no button. And then you'll have 2 forms sitting behind those. So when they click on them, they'll click on the yes, for example. They'll then arrive at a landing page that equates to the yes response. But on the way through, Eloqua has actually submitted the form in the back end. Now, the reason you want to do that can be many and varied. Sometimes you want to eliminate the need completely for people to ever see the form. Now, of course, the downside to that is you don't get the opportunity really to ask them any additional questions. But it might depend on the campaign. It probably depends on the audience. You may well know what you need to know, and you don't need to ask any more questions potentially. So blind forms can be quite helpful from that point of view. They're often used as well as quick ways of feedback. So if you're wanting to ask a question in an email, was this content good, yes or no? Then that would be a good example for blind form submissions in the back end to capture the yes or the no response in relation to people's feedback. And then you can also use the campaign canvas to submit a form as well. Along the same lines as the reasoning behind perhaps a blind form. The nice thing about submitting a form, it enables you to trigger a whole range of other functions using the form processing steps. It may be pushing things to the CRM. It might be triggering notification emails to account owners or contact owners of the different individuals. There's a whole range of reasons as to why that would be helpful. So they're the 4 main ways that you might use forms. One critical thing to always remember, though, is what that mobile experience is going to be like. Okay, so that mobile experience is critical when you're thinking about forms. And I try to always make sure I have my phone with me when I'm testing pages, looking at how far people have to scroll down to get to the form. Does that mean I need to rearrange the landing page a little to put the form closer to the top? How many of those fields are actually going to pre-populate because we know it's an Eloqua form on an Eloqua landing page. So then the progressive profiling, what's that going to look like within the form? So always have a think about that mobile experience as you work on those things. So some key tips for newer users for form fundamentals. First one is create form templates. Now, this will probably fall to your administrator or maybe more seasoned Eloqua users within the team, but form templates will absolutely speed the campaign build time, and they will ensure consistency in the way your data is managed. Okay, if you're looking at the idea and you think saving time is going to go to a past form and do a save as, trust me, it will not save you time, and it will only cause you grief. Every form is typically highly configured to do a very specific thing. And as soon as you save as a form and then decide, well, I don't need that field and I don't need that field, you'll go ahead and hit save once you delete the fields you don't want, and you're going to get these error messages, which sometimes I think they're written in Latin, but if you know what you're looking at in relation to the error message, it does help you identify the processing step that you probably also need to modify and change as well. And by the time you do all of that, it would have been much easier to simply create a new form from a template. Starting a form from scratch with absolutely no fields is, again, there's probably not a lot of future in that. It's unnecessary, it's time consuming, it's inconsistent because you're going to forget to do things, etc. So again, templates really are the key way to do it. And you'll need templates for contact us, templates for people to register for a webinar, maybe a template for people to access thought leadership, maybe a registration form for an in-person event. So you don't need that many, but they certainly do make life a lot easier for you. Certainly if you're doing reposting with the CMS, those types of forms, again, you might find templates a lot easier to help you in that process. And the one thing about templates is you can then fill them with progressive profiling as well. So it's a much smarter way to go about the process of using progressive profiling. When we think about it as we're building a form from scratch, I generally find we have less take up of progressive profiling. The best take up and use of progressive profiling that I've ever seen is when customers build it into form templates, so they don't have to think about it every single time. So a question here from Vicky, who's my new best friend, by the way, Vicky. How do we set up the pre-ticked I agree to opt-in forms with the if this is ticked, blah, blah, blah? Yep, that's a really good question. So the question that Vicky's asking, now I'm just trying to think of the quickest way for me to show you that. So Vicky is specifically asking about, actually I've got it there. Yeah, here we go. So she's asking about this right here. So this is not native to Eloqua. And this is where I talk about the benefit of templates. Okay, so the development team here at Marketing Cube helped me because I've got no idea how to do it. So they assisted me with a little bit of JavaScript, I want to say, and obviously a little bit of HTML, and also a little bit of CSS. So some styling as well. So essentially, there's some code that I have on all of my landing page templates, and my form is configured in and again, I use templates. Every month we use templates. So I never have to do anything with this. It just automatically appears on every single form that I create. Literally, it's been like that for a number of years, and I've never touched it. It literally is not a very lengthy process. You just need to determine what the language needs to be for you and your organization. And our support team could assist you with that pretty quickly, Vicky. But again, that only works, or let me rephrase, it works best and is consistent when you then have templates. So as long as you're using templates, that just becomes a no-brainer and you don't even have to think about it. It's not something to worry about. So hopefully that answers your question. Okay, so where were we? So progressive profiling early and as often as possible is the suggestion there. Now, there was another question. How to set up form templates from Anna. Hi, Anna. Good question. Let me show you. So if I go to our form area, and so you'll see here, for instance, in Marketing Cubes, this is Marketing Cubes instance, we don't have a million form templates, but these templates get used a lot, again and again and again. So for the user group, as example, I come in here and I access that particular template. I will answer your question here just in a moment. The first thing is to get the form template in a state that makes sense for you to use it as a template or to save it as a template. Moving things around, just line it up as to whatever you need to do. You'll see there's also a whole bunch of hidden field down the bottom here as well, like so, that you can see here. That's our little piece there, and it's because of this HTML name that our guys have configured for me. That could say Mickey Mouse. It doesn't matter what it says, but it says global opt-in in our world. But that HTML name, when I put that form onto one of our landing pages, there's corresponding JavaScript in there, which then dynamically produces that little piece of text that you saw on the page just a few moments ago. How do I create a template? Well, we get the template done to as much as possible, probably also making sure that we've got our processing steps configured and in place. We go to save as a template. So depending on your levels of access to Eloqua and based on your profile, you should see that information. If you don't see that as an option in the file menu, then we just need to have a chat with your administrator and have them, you could potentially build it out or work with your administrator, etc., and then ask them to save it as a template for you. One thing I would encourage you to think through, depending on the size of your organization and the geographical spread of your organization, is to also think about how you label these. Now, we're a small business and there's really just us. However, if you start to think about, a larger organization with multiple geographies or a university with different faculties, etc., you want to think of a sensible naming convention that's going to make it much easier for people to find the right template. So hopefully that answers your question. Thank you, Anna. So let's jump back in. So the right form field. So again, it's very simple to keep doing the same thing we've always done and actually not realize there are a whole range of other options for us to play with. So when it comes to building out and designing your form to capture this information, think first about the data that you want to capture and then design the best possible form in order to do that. And so Eloqua gives you a whole range of different ways to do that within the form. And there's the things that you would expect to see: single line text. So a first name would be single line text. Paragraph text, if you wanted to capture people's comments, or like we do, we ask some people if they'd like to submit a question. So that'd be a paragraph text. You've then got pick lists. So whether it's a single pick list or even a single checkbox, like the opt-in, for example, is a single checkbox. But in addition to that, you've also got form text. So that enables you to actually put it like a little header in between different sections of the form. So the first one might be, information about you and first name, last name, email, then information about your company, and there might be company details, etc. So you can also do multiple pick lists, radio buttons, checkboxes, so multiple checkboxes. So, please check all options that are applicable, check, check, check. And hidden fields. So hidden fields are critically important when you're wanting to make sure that you've got attribution in check and that you've also potentially pushing information through to the system, the CRM system as well. So hidden fields can also be used for campaign IDs. So if you've got CRM with campaign functionality, then that'll usually generate a unique ID. So again, we can, from an attribution point of view, have that information flow directly into the CRM and be attributed to the campaign in question. So hidden fields are substantial. You can also do field merges as well within hidden fields, just as you can within the first name, last name, etc. Those sorts of fields. So hidden fields are a really cool way to do things and to help from a data point of view. So let's just dive back in there quickly and have a quick look at some of those aspects of a form. So I'll choose this March user group form just as an example for you. All right, so you'll see on the left-hand side, you've got the ability to load in contact fields and then what's called form elements. So these are all the bits and pieces we just talked about. So the pick list, the paragraph text, the single line text, checkboxes, multiple checkboxes, and of course the hidden fields as well. So contact fields relates to everything that you have on the contact. Now you'll notice there are no account fields, and there's a good reason for that. Account fields are really not something that you want an individual to be populating via a form. For most organizations, from a best practice point of view, account records are very critical to most organizations. And the source of truth typically is not the marketing platform. The source of truth is typically an ERP, or maybe for some organizations, that source of truth is the CRM platform. Typically, it's wherever you generate your billing from. So wherever the billing is generated, that typically is going to be the source of truth. So we can certainly send information, and we can capture a person's company name and associate it to the contact. That information can then be you can go through different processes to get it cleaned, etc., and then make sure it's the same as what's on the account record. But everything you do in the context of a form relates to the contact. So you'll notice you've got the ability here to add different columns, etc. So you can drop in other bits of information. So depending on how your form functions, you've got the ability to sort of play around with that. And you'll notice it's pretty much just like the email editor, right? So you've got the ability here to move pieces around, selecting different functions. You'll see the horizontal line changes there. So you can play with those as is appropriate for you. Then in relation to making things required, that's obviously an important part of the process. You'll see the little asterisks that you've got there. and you just simply, it's called field validation. You can change the message. The default is, this field is required, is obvious. Then you may choose to make some not required. You can see here, we've got some that are not required. With progressive profiling, what you want to do typically is make all of the different ones required within it, but over here you can control which number or how many of those questions are presented at any one time. So it says here fields to display. So at Marketing Cube, we've elected out of all those different questions that we might ask from a progressive profiling point of view, we only want to present one of them at a time. And we only want to present a question if the field is currently empty. In other words, we don't have a response to that particular question. So in some cases, some of you will never see anything here because we already have those different responses from you over time. So that's helpful from that point of view. There's the SMS piece right there. You'll notice also some people have asked us over the time, how is it when I ask for an SMS, the mobile phone field just drops down? How do I do that? Well, again, that's a little bit of HTML and JavaScript magic that our team have developed for me. So it comes down to the mobile or the HTML name. So again, we call it mobile phone because it makes sense. But again, it could be Mickey Mouse or Donald Duck. It doesn't really matter what it is, as long as it's in HTML format, no spaces. And then that works in conjunction again with our landing page. So our landing page templates have some code in there as well. And again, I don't touch that from month to month. I never touch it. It doesn't need to be touched. It's just functionality that works every single time. So those little bits and pieces you can add for additional functionality should you want to. So you can see this is the March user group, so not quite there, as we learnt from, I think it was Vicky helping me earlier. So thank you again, Vicky. First thing I'll be doing after this call is fixing those emails. And so you'll see all of these hidden fields down the bottom here. They're actually all field mergers, which means if we know that information already, it'll pre-populate. And a lot of that helps me drive some of the processing steps over on the back end as well in relation to notification emails. So if I'm sending notification emails to people like here, customer success people, etc., sales people. So what I'm doing is I'm taking the actual, you'll notice here you've got some options. I'm using the value of a form field to select the email address that notification email will in fact be sent to. And so because it's a field merge, as in here, so this one is a field merge, it'll either pull in Adrian, it'll either pull in Jason and whoever it might be, for instance, and that way I don't have to send every single form submission to the entire team. I'm just sending the notification email to the account director who owns the relationship with that particular organization. So that's how you can play with it. Now, view dependencies is something that a lot of people don't play with, but is really, really helpful. So it helps me understand where that particular form is being used. And it's currently being used on a landing page. And I can actually access that landing page directly here from the editor itself. All right, let's jump in and have a closer look at some advanced uses. So if you need a hand with any of those different aspects that we talked about from a form point of view, if you scan that QR code, that'll trigger an email to our support team. So for those customers who have joined us today, if you've got a question or you're unsure about something, you'd like a little bit more information, please go ahead and either scan the QR code or just simply email support@marketingcube.com.au. Okay, some advanced tips. We talked a little bit earlier about how forms can actually be quite a bit more than just simply a form. And I suppose what I mean there is different applications. And so what we've done here is just try and bullet point some of the less conventional uses of forms that we've seen over the years that people use them for. So presenting a quiz, because if you think about a form at the end of the day, as far as Eloqua is concerned, a form is essentially a series of cells that are being presented to people where they can either type information into them or through a single select pick list, they can select a response, for instance, and put that information in. Now, for you and I, who are not HTML gurus, and maybe there are some on the line who are, and congratulations, I wish I was, but you're only limited really by your imagination as to how you do these things. So when I build out a form, I create the form, I use the interface, I drop it onto my Eloqua landing page, etc. So it's a form sitting on a page, and that's kind of it. However, if you think about things like a quiz, for example, a quiz may be something where you want to present a question, have a response captured, and have that leave the screen. And now it refreshes to present another question, potentially from a quiz point of view. All of these things are absolutely possible with a little bit of HTML magic being thrown into things. Also having adaptive forms. So this is where questions might change based on past responses. We can't do that natively within the platform. So that's where a little bit of HTML magic again can kick in to help you build out those sorts of things. We had a client a number of years ago who sent a regular customer satisfaction survey to people after they had purchased some equipment that they sold. And they decided to use Eloqua to do that because of the ease of integration with their CRM platform and keeping all that information consolidated within a platform that they could then later use it for marketing. So it made sense to do it like that. The other key thing from their point of view was that survey really didn't change that often. It probably changed slightly every couple of years. So they invested some time and some support dollars to have that completely built within Eloqua to deliver. So it did exactly that. It was very adaptive based on what they'd purchased, where they'd purchased it. Different responses meant they would then ask different questions, etc. So that stuff can be really, really helpful. Post-event surveys. So maybe you're holding in-person events again. Let's all keep our fingers crossed. Or even webinars, etc. Post-event surveys, very simple. And typically with a post-event survey, you don't want to ask a million questions. You really just want to ask a few key questions, and Eloqua can absolutely do that for you. Another fun one is calculators. So again, is that a calculator, a form? How does that work? Well, forms are actually really quite smart. They're really quite clever. And with a little bit of HTML magic added to it, they can do all sorts of really cool things. So if you think about like an ROI calculator, for example, or how many what are the savings I'm going to make? For instance, where you put a little bit of information and then a response can be delivered. So the form is able to capture that information. They hit submit, and within a few nanoseconds, we can process that information and then present an outcome, essentially, at the back end of that. Some of you may have taken part in one of the surveys we run around strategic marketing. And so that, at the end of the day, is just simply an Eloqua form. It asks you a series of questions, gives you scenarios, etc. We capture that information, we score it all at the back end, and then present you with a profile or a result. So there's a whole different range of ways you can do it. Now, of course, then there's the basics like event registration, there's gated thought leadership, and preference centers is a big one, and subscriptions. So preference centers, there might be just about a person's preferences versus actual subscriptions. They may be, you may use those words interchangeably, but they can also be something quite different. But again, all forms. So all different ways that you can use forms to do something a little bit different than perhaps how you're doing it today. When is required? Essentially what the question or the point we're trying to get to here is that if you've got a question or a form filled with multiple questions, you really got to think through, do I really need to have 10 or 15 required questions? Is it just too much? Look, I think in most cases it probably is a little bit too much. I created a visual to try and help support this, and not picking on anybody here. I thought I'll pick on us as well. So to go in, I just kind of went to four contact us forms very randomly. You can see I've got the Prime Minister of Australia on the left. We have an Australian university. We have Marketing Cube, and we have an Australian bank over there on the far right-hand side. But I can tell you for a fact that 2 of those are Eloqua clients. You can probably figure out that Marketing Cube is. And what I was looking at was the asterisks. I was just randomly trying to get an idea as to the required fields across different types of environments. What was interesting was you'll see on the far right-hand side, I thought that mobile experience was a bit disappointing. That was a bit strange, but there's a lot of required questions there. Marketing Cube is sort of in the middle, I suppose. It's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 required questions. And then, of course, you've got to opt in at the bottom. The future student inquiry from a university. So different types of inquiries I find across the universities, depending on who you are. So are you looking to study, or if you are an existing student, different types of things. Most of the things I found, if you're an existing student, you kind of have to log in to get there. So obviously that didn't work for me. I had to focus on the marketing side of things. And then the Prime Minister of Australia pretty much wants to know just about everything about you and exactly who you are and where you are before you can do much or submit that particular query. So the research done a number of years ago now by Eloqua was that around, I think it was 6 or 7 fields on a form is kind of the optimum. When they did a study across all of their Eloqua clients, looking at all of the different form submissions, which will vary from some people presenting simply one field being email address through to others, asking 20 questions, for example. The forms that got the greatest amount of submissions on average was around, I want to say 7, was around 7 fields. Okay. So you can't always do that because some forms will have a very specific purpose and you need to ask very specific questions in order to deliver what it is you're trying to do. But if we think about that number 1 priority, which you had as better lead generation and nurturing, very early in the sales cycle, that very top of funnel, whether it's a high school student from a university point of view, whether it's an individual within a business identifying a future need, then we can probably go easy and go early, right? So we can just start with the basics. It's email, first name. Maybe that's enough. Then we move on and we expand, but that's where your progressive profiling comes into play. So you don't have to think about this stuff. Use the progressive profiling to deliver that nice experience and reduce the ability of people to just abandon a form. You don't want to make it difficult. Of course, having it pre-populate, again, makes things a lot easier. So having your Eloqua form on an Eloqua landing page is a great way to do that. So that was just a random example. I'd encourage you to sort of go through this process if you like. You've probably got competitors out there in the marketplace. I'm sure you do. Have a look at what they're doing. How many questions are they asking? Are they getting more leads than you are? Is one reason because they ask 3 questions and you ask 15 questions? Go and have a look, explore and see what your competitors are up to. Okay. So better lead capture and lead management, forms really do play a critical part in that exercise. And so just some tips here for the more advanced users. If you are running a very targeted ad campaign, make sure your form matches. Make sure your form is maximizing that, and it has your attribution data and it has all the right information in it. And the processing steps are in fact doing what they should do in the context of that particular campaign. That progressive profiling is critical. Again, if you're not clear on progressive profiling, reach out and we can have more of a discussion. You will find some information you will find good information in the Eloqua Help Center as well. Hidden fields are really important from a lead source point of view, because if you are running targeted ad campaigns, you want from an attribution, you want to know, did that LinkedIn ad work the best, or was it in fact the Facebook ad, or was it the Google ad that we ran? Which one performed the best? Unless you've got that information captured within the form, it becomes difficult to do that attribution. And again, that hidden field construct, especially from a CRM campaign ID, really does help that process as well. Subscription forms. So again, this can be another really good way to, a smarter use of forms. Sorry, there's a question here from Vicky. Sometimes forms pre-populate with the tester's form information pre-filled. Is there a way to guarantee avoiding this? Yeah, good question, Vicky. A really good question. I literally just had this discussion with a client last Friday. The easiest way, if you're testing your forms, as you know, as an Eloqua user, you'll have submitted 1,000 forms for testing, etc. So what happens is you've got cookies sitting on your device. Your browser also plays a role in this. And sometimes the browser is in fact doing what you think Eloqua might be doing. And so it can get a little bit tricky. But if you are testing a form, my advice to you is when the email comes into your in tray, right click on, so you've got a button, on your email, right click on that button, copy the URL and paste that URL into an incognito browser session or a private browser session. That will give you a better experience if you're in fact because you're trying to test it as though you're a punter receiving the campaign. So typically try and avoid putting it into your own, because you'll just end up with cookie confusion. So if you then try to put in a dummy name, for instance, your form pre-populates with Vicky Fowler, and then Vicky, you decide to type over it and type in, Jenny Smith, for example, you're just going to end up with cookie confusion. So the easiest way to do your testing is to use an incognito browser session. Okay, so targeted subscription forms. If you're running your email groups within Eloqua as active subscriptions, like we do with the user group, for example, we actually set up individual campaigns and have calls to action across different campaigns, targeting people to subscribe to the user group. So become a member of the user group to ensure you never miss an invitation. Okay, so that's one way to do it. You may have newsletters, for example. So thinking about creating forms that are specifically to capture subscriptions. And these would be probably fall into your always on type of campaigns. So think about that. We talked a little bit about newsletter subscriptions last year, I think it was. We did a webinar on that. You'll find that on our blog. There's some good information in there. So these are just some examples. People go to our website for events. We invite them to then subscribe to our events when they're then brought to this registration page, which is an Eloqua landing page with a form on it. And that's all this form does. Its whole existence in life is to capture subscriptions. There is some progressive profiling sitting behind that as well. So if we already know some things about you, that will change slightly, etc. So just one example. Okay. Beyond the forms in Eloqua, don't forget, you've also got some reporting available within Insight. You've also got the form dashboards accessible within Eloqua itself, etc. Looking at form performance, like for instance, there's been a couple of examples here where I've told you about forms that we have that are always on. And so it's critical to go back to those forms. And the only way I remember to do it is to either set myself up a subscription and have a report come in automatically from Insight, or I put a note in my diary that, every 3 months, revisit this, and this. Because otherwise, because they're always on and they're just sort of happening in the background, they can sort of slip away and be forgotten. So setting yourself up a bit of a schedule to go through and regularly review the performance of those forms is a great idea. Okay, and the last point we wanted to raise was helping you think about it from a lead scoring point of view. So your lead scoring is diminished by poor quality data. So the richer the data, the more effective the lead score model. I know it sounds obvious, but there's just been so many instances where we've, I personally, and I know Adrian and others in the team have, where the client will get excited about a particular piece of data that we absolutely must make sure that's in the lead score, etc. So we then go into Eloqua. They've got a database of 1 million contacts, and we see that 3,500 people have a value against them that they just described as being critical. So it comes back again to that strategy discussion and making sure the strategy around what really is important, the data that does matter, is in fact being captured, and we have a proactive campaign in place to actually obtain that information from people. Unless you've been through that process, this won't make a lot of sense to you, but I promise you, as soon as you start that lead scoring discussion, and as long as you've got sales and marketing and service potentially in the room as well, then it really does help align the team and really helps the administrators of your Eloqua instance and the team more generally to get the right sort of data being captured and brought in. Key point being, you can only lead score on the data that you have. Okay. The other example that we've seen over the years is, well, country is important. Well, the problem is they've got 3 different fields that capture country. So which one is it? Okay. So that consolidation of data, and someone who holds the title of data steward is probably a pretty critical person to have within the business. So it will definitely uncover gaps, as I've said there. As soon as you start that lead scoring discussion, these other little mini projects will definitely spin off in the back end where things need to be cleaned up and tidied up in order to have an effective lead score model. So if you want to talk more about lead scoring, let us know. Happy to have that conversation with you. And just quickly before we wrap up, the final or the 22A release is rolling out this month. If you wanted to get some information from us about that in a bit more detail, you can subscribe to the important Eloqua update service. That usually is no more than 1 or 2 emails a quarter, talking about those different updates and just giving you a little bit more practical information about how you can help them or how you can use them and how they can potentially help your different campaigns. So when does that happen? It happens, and it's happened for those who are on pod 1. It's already happened. For those who are on pod 7, which is most of the Australian and New Zealand clients, then it's already happened as well, which leaves us with pods 3, 4, and 6 happening on the 19th of February. So you'll see those changes coming through. So what are those changes? So one of the cool ones is what they're calling a split decision step on the canvas. So this is a new decision element that you can drag out onto your campaign canvas that will in fact help you split an audience based on a percentage. Some of you may have used a shared filter in the past to do something like this, which is doable. This is just simple in relation to achieving that same sort of result. The other one is the intelligent form spam prevention, and you may have seen this previously. I'll jump in here very quickly and show you. There is also updates around the Apple Mail privacy changes, which is giving you more effective insight reporting. This will be expanded on a little bit more detail in our important update subscription, which will go out this week or next week for everybody. Then also blind form shortening. So this may or may not mean anything to you, but for those that are familiar and use this, what that does essentially is make the personally identifiable information, or PII, information secure. It was a little bit of a security gap potentially, but that will be available. Everybody will have that, so that's cool. In relation to the Zoom app, for those clients using Zoom, the only update at the moment is that we don't have a date for the new app. Apparently there are legal discussions happening. And from what I understand, those legal discussions have been happening for quite some time. So I'm afraid we do not have an update on that one. And for those who are interested, the new SMS functionality from Eloqua. So some of you on the call today will be using the Marketing Cube app to deliver an SMS solution. Oracle now has their own native to Eloqua SMS functionality. It's an add-on, so it does require more money. But, if you're interested, we can certainly get some pricing for you and expand on that in a little bit more detail, should you be interested in that one. So please let us know. All right, very quickly. This is it. So it's referred to as the audience split. And what I've tried to do here is just give you a little bit of an example. So the idea is that you use a sliding scale from a percentage point of view, going down the yes or the no path, like so. So your segment would be here at the top. You might have 25,000 people sitting in your segment. And then for whatever reason, it would be helpful for you to be able to split that group out. This is not A/B testing, but it's a component that would enable you to do a little bit of A/B testing, sort of. Okay, it's not going to allow you to automatically select the winning email and then send that to the remaining group of people, but it does enable you to delay sending, for instance, and to split groups accordingly. So a few things for you to consider there. In relation to the form, you'll notice over here on the left-hand side, these are your different tabs here at the top of the form. Under the general settings tab, what you will see is spam protection. And so it's, if you're putting an Eloqua form on an Eloqua landing page, go ahead and turn it on. It's not a drama. If you're doing a repost, though, there is a little bit of HTML work that needs to be done, because if you're doing a repost that is looking at something from your website, for those who do that on a regular basis, Let me save that. You'll know that there's some HTML work that needs to be done. Eloqua produces that HTML. There's a little bit of work that needs to be done to ensure the flow continues from your website into Eloqua. So if you do have forms like this that are currently sitting on your website or CMS, don't just simply turn this on. Okay, you need to think that through. That's why it's there as an option. It's not mandated that it be turned on for everyone because there's a little bit of work that needs to be done from that reposting point of view. Again, if you need some assistance with that, just let us know and we can certainly help you with that. So I appreciate we've had a number of questions throughout, which is really helpful from my point of view. So thank you. Thank you so much for joining us for the first user group for 2022. We look forward to seeing you next month, which is all about working with the data that matters. So today was identifying that data. Next month, we'll be looking at some really specific and tangible ways of actually working with that data. So we look forward to seeing you in March. Thank you, everybody, and have a wonderful week.